Driving alone at night always felt a bit creepy, but that night, the feeling was stronger. I was on a long stretch of highway that seemed endless. There were no other cars, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was quiet, the only sound was the hum of my engine and the rustle of the wind. I'd been driving for hours, and my eyes were getting heavy. I rolled down the window to let in some fresh air, hoping it would keep me awake. The cold night air bit at my skin, but it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a faint light up ahead. It flickered like a candle. As I got closer, I realized it was a car parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing. I slowed down, thinking whether I should stop to help. It was late, and the nearest town was miles away. Someone might need help. I pulled over and got out of the car. The night was silent except for the clicking of the hazard lights. I walked up to the car carefully. It looked old and beat up. I looked inside and saw that it was empty. There was no one around. My gut told me to get back in my car and leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I looked around, calling out to see if anyone was nearby, but there was no answer. Just then, I heard a rustling noise from the trees beside the road. My heart started pounding. I called out again, but there was still no response. Feeling it was too dangerous to stay any longer, I turned to head back to my car. That's when I noticed a glint of something shiny under the parked car. Kneeling down, I saw a small, shiny object. It was a keychain with a key still attached. It seemed out of place, like it had been dropped in a hurry. As I stood up, a sudden, loud noise echoed through the night. It sounded like a gunshot. I froze, my heart racing. In the distance, I saw a figure running through the trees, moving fast, away from the road. Without thinking, I sprinted back to my car, jumped in, and slammed the door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine. I sped off, my mind racing. Who was that person? Why were they running? And what was that noise? As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. Eventually, I reached the next town, my heart still pounding. I pulled into a gas station and took a moment to calm down. The bright lights and the sight of other people made me feel a bit safer. I called the local police and reported what I'd seen, giving them the location of the abandoned car. The officer on the phone assured me they would send someone to check it out. As I hung up, I realized how lucky I was. I had trusted my instincts and left before anything could happen. Driving away from the gas station, I felt a sense of relief. The highway stretched out before me again, but this time, I was more alert, more cautious. The night felt a bit less threatening now, and I was determined to reach my destination safely. But as I drove, the image of that running figure and the loud noise kept replaying in my mind. Just when I thought I could relax, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared, distant but steadily getting closer. They seemed to be following me. I sped up, but so did the car behind me. My heart raced again. I realized my escape might not be over yet. The sense of relief I felt earlier vanished, replaced by a chilling fear that someone, or something, was still out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. Driving down the lonely stretch of highway, I felt the weight of being so tired. I'd been driving for hours, heading home from a work trip. The night was pitch black, and the only sound was the hum of my tires on the road. I noticed my gas gauge was getting low. The next town was far away, and I wasn't sure I'd make it. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the road ahead seemed never-ending. Road signs flashed by, but they didn't help much. Then, in the distance, I saw a faint light. As I got closer, I realized it was a gas station. Relief washed over me. I pulled in and parked by the pump. The place looked old and run down, but it was open. I filled my tank, thankful for the unexpected stop. After paying, I decided to use the bathroom. Inside, the place was strangely quiet. The lights flickered, and the air smelled stale. I quickly did my business and washed my hands, eager to get back on the road. As I walked out, I heard a faint noise behind me. Turning around, I saw nothing but empty aisles. I shrugged it off, blaming my tired mind for playing tricks on me. Back in my car, I started the engine and pulled out of the station. A few miles down the road, I saw headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. The car behind me was getting closer fast. I kept to my lane, thinking it was just another late-night traveler. But the car didn't pass. It stayed right on my bumper, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car matched my speed. My heart raced as I thought about what to do. There was nowhere to pull over, and the next town was still far away. I kept driving, my eyes darting between the road and the car behind me. Suddenly, the other car swerved into the opposite lane and sped up, pulling up beside me. I glanced over and saw a man in the driver's seat, his face hidden in shadows. He rolled down his window and waved angrily, but I couldn't tell what he wanted. I sped up again, trying to get away from him. The man did the same, staying alongside me. I felt a surge of panic, unsure of what to do next. Then, he jerked his car toward mine, forcing me to swerve to avoid a crash. My tires screeched as I struggled to stay in control. The man pulled back, then rammed his car toward mine again. My car skidded, but I managed to stay on the road. I was running out of options. Then, up ahead, I saw the lights of a truck stop. I floored the gas, aiming for the bright lights. The man seemed to realize what I was doing and backed off, his car slowing down. I pulled into the truck stop, my hands shaking. I parked near the entrance and jumped out, running inside. The place was busy, filled with truckers and travelers. I explained what happened to the clerk, who called the police. They arrived quickly and took my story. The officers searched the area but found no sign of the other car. They assured me they'd patrol the highway and keep an eye out. I stayed at the truck stop for a while, calming down and gathering my thoughts. Eventually, I got back in my car and continued my drive. I drove the rest of the way without any trouble, the bright lights of the approaching town a welcome sight. When I finally reached home, I felt a deep sense of relief. The nightmare on the highway was over, and I was safe. It was a terrifying experience, but it made me more careful and aware of the dangers out there. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the incident behind me. But one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a familiar sound outside. My heart sank as I looked out the window and saw a car with its headlights glaring into my room. The same car from that night on the highway. It just sat there, engine idling, and I knew this wasn't over. I was driving down Route 66 late at night, and it always creeped me out. The road seemed to go on forever, with just the occasional flicker of my headlights and the soft hum of the engine for company. Approaching an old, rusty sign that said, "Next gas station 50 miles. My heart sank. The fuel gauge was dangerously low. I kept going, hoping to reach the next town before I ran out of gas. Minutes turned into hours in the darkness. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, peering through the mist for any signs of the road ahead. Then I saw it, a figure standing by the roadside. My heart skipped a beat as I drove past, catching a glimpse of a tattered jacket and an old hat. A hitchhiker, maybe, but who would be out here at this hour? A chill ran down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. Had they vanished into the fog or slipped back into the darkness? The engine coughed and died. Panic surged as the car coasted to a stop. Out of gas. In the eerie silence, I cursed and checked my phone. No signal. I was truly alone, stranded on this lonely highway. I decided to walk, hoping to find help. The fog obscured everything, making every step uncertain. Time dragged on as I trudged forward, my senses on edge with every shadow and sound. Suddenly, headlights cut through the mist, a truck slowing down as it approached. Relief flooded over me as I waved desperately. explaining my situation to the driver. He nodded and offered to take me to the next gas station. During the drive, he shared stories of strange happenings along this deserted road. I listened, uneasy but grateful for his company and the warmth of the truck's heater against the cold night. Eventually, the lights of a small town appeared on the horizon. The driver dropped me off at a gas station, where I filled my tank and thanked him profusely. Glancing back at the dark highway, now distant and quiet, I realized how close I had come to a different fate. As I drove away, relieved to leave the eerie highway behind, a chill ran down my spine again. In the rearview mirror, for a split second, I thought I saw a faint figure standing by the road where the truck had picked me up. But as quickly as I noticed, it vanished into the night. I was driving alone on a dark, empty highway late at night, my headlights slicing through the darkness. Rain began to fall, turning the road slippery and dangerous. My mind wandered, distracted by the steady swish of the wipers and occasional flashes of lightning. Out of nowhere, I spotted a figure by the roadside, barely visible through the downpour. A hitchhiker, maybe stranded in this remote stretch of highway. Normally, I wouldn't stop, but something about their soaked and motionless stance stirred guilt in me. I cautiously pulled over, my heart pounding in my chest. Rolling down the window, the figure approached slowly, revealing a tired face and trembling hands. They muttered something barely audible over the storm, a desperate plea for help. Hesitantly, I unlocked the passenger door. The hitchhiker climbed in silently, their presence eerie yet oddly calming amidst the storm's fury. I focused on the road ahead, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Minutes passed in tense silence. The hitchhiker stared out into the night, their eyes reflecting passing car headlights like distant stars. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, a knot of anxiety growing in my stomach as we drove deeper into the storm. Then, suddenly, the hitchhiker turned towards me. Their expression was unreadable in the dim interior of the car. A chill shot down my spine as they reached into their coat, pulling out a small, glinting object. Fear surged through me, adrenaline rushing through my veins. In a split-second decision, I veered sharply to the side of the road, slamming on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, tires screeching on wet pavement. Heart racing, I turned to confront the hitchhiker, ready to defend myself. But they were gone. The passenger seat sat empty, raindrops tapping softly against the window. Confusion and fear overwhelmed me as I scanned the deserted highway, searching desperately for any sign of the mysterious hitchhiker. There was nothing. No trace remained, only the relentless rain and distant thunder. Trembling, I started the car again, hands shaking on the wheel as I sped away from that desolate stretch of road. As I drove, a chilling realization washed over me. I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than a stranded traveler. The highway stretched ahead, endless in the night, a silent witness to the inexplicable encounter that would haunt me forever. I was driving home late one night. The highway stretched out in front of me like a never-ending road. The only light came from my headlights and a few street lamps here and there. It was one of those nights where everything seemed too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. As I drove, I saw a car ahead of me, swerving a bit. At first, I thought the driver might be tired or drunk. I slowed down to keep a safe distance. The car straightened out, and I thought the driver had fixed their mistake. But then, the swerving started again, more wildly this time. I decided to pass the car and get away from it. As I went by it, I looked over to see who was driving. To my shock, there was no one in the driver's seat. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly looked back at the road, my mind racing to find a reason. Maybe I had seen it wrong. Maybe the driver was slumped over. Wanting to be sure, I sped up and got in front of the car, then slowed down to make it pass me again. As it did, I looked closely. The driver's seat was empty. Completely empty. Panic hit me. I sped up, trying to get as far from that car as possible. My mind was a mess of thoughts. How was the car moving? Was it controlled by a remote? Was someone playing a sick joke? I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the car fall back. Instead, it was getting closer. Fast. My heart pounded as I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, driving my car as fast as it could go. The strange car matched my speed, sticking to my bumper like a shadow. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the car began flashing its high beams at me, blinding me for a moment. I swerved, nearly losing control. The lights were so bright, I couldn't see anything ahead. I knew I had to get off the highway. I saw an exit sign up ahead and took the turn sharply, tires screeching. The car followed. I sped down the off-ramp, my eyes searching for any sign of help. Up ahead, I saw a gas station with its lights on. I pulled in, skidding to a stop near the entrance. The other car raced past the station, continuing down the road. I sat there, breathing heavily, my hands shaking on the wheel. After a moment, I pulled myself together and got out of the car, heading inside the gas station. The clerk looked at me with concern as I walked in, clearly seeing the fear on my face. I told him what had happened, but he just shook his head. "You're not the first to say something like that," he said. "People have reported an empty car on the highway for weeks. Police can't find anything. Some think it's just a prank." I didn't care what it was. I decided then and there I wasn't driving on that highway at night ever again. I finished my trip on the back roads, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see those blinding lights again. A few days later, I read in the news about a car crash on that same highway. The article said it was a single-car accident, and the driver was found dead at the scene. The weird part? The police said the driver's seat was empty. I was driving home late one night after a long day at work. The highway stretched out before me, empty and dark except for the occasional flicker of distant headlights. I was exhausted but wanted to get home as quickly as I could. As I drove, the constant hum of the tires on the road started to make me drowsy. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a car tailgating me. Its headlights were blinding, and the car seemed to be almost on my back bumper. I checked my mirrors, but the car stayed right behind me, no matter how fast or slow I went. It made me uneasy, but I hoped they'd pass soon. The road ahead curved sharply. As I turned, I looked in my rearview mirror again. To my shock, the tailgating car had disappeared. I was relieved, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I kept driving, my eyes darting around the dark road, trying to shake the sense that something wasn't right. Then I saw it, a shape lying on the side of the road, hidden partly by shadows. As I got closer, I realized it was a person lying still. My heart pounded. I slowed down, trying to see more clearly. It looked like someone had been in a bad accident. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone to call for help. I dialed 911 and described what I saw. The operator told me to stay where I was and keep a safe distance. I followed their instructions, watching the figure from my car. Minutes later, emergency vehicles arrived. Paramedics hurried to the scene, and a police officer came up to me. After I explained what I saw, I overheard the officer talking to the paramedics. It turned out the person on the road was a driver who had crashed and was barely alive. They would make it, but it was close. As the emergency team worked, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I had been scared and unsure, but my decision to pull over had likely saved a life. I started to drive away, but a chill ran down my spine. In the dark, I saw the shadow of someone standing in the distance by the side of the road. They were just watching. I didn't see their face clearly, but the way they stood there, unmoving, made my skin crawl. I looked away, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But even after I got home, the image of that shadow lingered. The highway was still dark, and now it felt like a place where unseen eyes were always watching, waiting for the next car to drive by. The headlights of my car sliced through the heavy rain, making long shadows dance across the empty highway. I had just finished a late shift at work and was heading home. The roads were slick with rain, and the occasional rumble of thunder added to the creepy feeling. It was just after midnight, and the highway was completely deserted. I turned on the radio, hoping the music would cover the strange silence. For a moment, there was just static, and then a low, urgent voice crackled through, barely heard over the storm. The voice kept saying, "Beware the truck, beware the truck." I tried to ignore it, thinking it was a prank or a glitch, but it made me uneasy. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and pushed the car faster, wanting to get home as quickly as possible. Just then, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. The truck behind me was huge, its lights cutting through the rain like twin searchlights. I could barely see the truck's shape. It was an old, rusty model. The truck quickly closed the gap between us. I started to panic. I sped up, but the truck kept up, staying right behind me. I took an exit off the highway, hoping to lose it, but the truck followed, its engine growling menacingly. My heart pounded as I took several turns, but the truck stayed right on my tail, its lights reflecting eerily in the wet streets. Desperate, I pulled into a small, poorly lit gas station. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck screeched to a stop just behind me. I put the car in reverse, ready to get out of there, but before I could move, the truck's lights went out, and it sat completely still. I jumped out of the car and ran to the gas station's office, banging on the door. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a worried look, opened up. As I rushed inside, I looked back at the truck, which was still. The attendant stared at the truck through the window, his face growing pale. He told me that truck had been reported missing for years. It was known for being involved in strange disappearances. Drivers who had encountered it under similar circumstances had never been found, and there were stories about people being hunted on that stretch of road. The storm finally began to calm down as dawn approached. With the attendant's help, I stayed at the gas station until the truck finally drove off, vanishing into the early morning fog. I never saw it again, but the feeling of being hunted stayed with me. That night, I learned something chilling. The truck wasn't just following me. It was looking for someone. Every driver it had followed before me had ended up missing. The worst part? The truck was still out there, searching, and there was no guarantee it wouldn't find me or anyone else on that road again.